The Wisdom of Solomon. It's a poetic remix of the main ideas found in the wisdom books of the Hebrew Bible, but with a Greek flair. An anonymous Jewish author wrote this book in Greek sometime in the 1st century BC to represent the biblical values of wisdom and fearing the Lord for Greek-speaking Jews of their own day. With the spread of Greek culture throughout the ancient world, followed by the rise of the Roman Empire, many Jewish people found it difficult to remain faithful to their biblical heritage and convictions. Many groups adapted, and some even abandoned their faith altogether, adopting a more cosmopolitan way of life, including the worship of many gods and the many moral compromises that came along with that. So the author of this book turned to the Torah and prophets and the books of wisdom to create a new Solomon-like voice to speak to a new day. Someone who could talk like a wise Israelite sage and like a Greek philosopher. His goal is to persuade struggling Jewish communities to see that the God of Israel is the true king of the nations, and all rulers, philosophers, and Israelites should give their loyalty to him. The Wisdom of Solomon was not ever included as part of the Hebrew Bible. It was written in Greek, and that's why it's not considered scripture by later Jewish and Protestant Christian traditions today. But it was very popular among Greek-speaking Jewish communities, including the Messianic Jews who followed Jesus. So some early Christian traditions adopted this book into an expanded scriptural collection. And that's why it's part of the Roman Catholic and Orthodox Deuterocanon collections today. But despite those later differences, this book has been valued and studied by Christians across traditions and through the centuries. And here's how it works. The opening movement in chapters 1 through 6 portrays the world in terms of a stark contrast. There are the wise and there are the wicked. Each group is loyal to different authorities and has different values, and each has a different destiny. This section has a really cool symmetrical design, beginning and ending with an anonymous voice who addresses the rulers of the earth. He adopts the challenge of Psalm 2 given to all world rulers, calling them to submit to their king, the Most High God, and to seek his wisdom about good and evil. In the matching conclusion, we discover that the speaker is a son of David, Solomon figure. And as in Psalm 2, the kings of the world are called to learn true wisdom by acknowledging that their rule is under God's authority. The author is subverting the illusion projected by the world empires of his day. If they don't humble themselves before God's wisdom, God will orchestrate their downfall. And that leads to the next matching intersections. We hear two speeches from the wicked who reject God's wisdom. The first is a prideful boast that expresses a Greek philosophy of the day called Epicureanism, especially popular among the wealthy and influential. In this philosophy, the universe and our existence have no purpose and no meaning. All you can do is enjoy life's fleeting pleasures, and then you die. And when communities recognize no authority greater than their own desires, it inevitably leads to injustice and neglect of the poor. Here, the Exodus story is called upon. When God's children, the poor and the outsider, are ignored by the privileged, God will ensure that the tables are turned. And so this section concludes by imagining a sad confession from the wicked once their lives end and they have to leave their wealth behind. They vanish like a shadow with nothing to show for it except a lot of regret. At the center of this section is a contrast between the destinies of the wise and wicked. Those who seek God's wisdom will live in the trust that one day all humanity will be accountable to God for their choices. In that final reckoning, the current social order will get turned upside down. The suffering righteous will get vindicated in the dawn of a new age, while the arrogant will be humiliated and left to their selfishness and folly. This entire first section is a challenge to all human cultures and kingdoms, and a stark choice is placed before the reader. Will I choose the way of wisdom and submit to God's authority or not? And what outcome do I want for my life, the fate of the wise or of the wicked? These are precisely the themes developed in the two remaining sections of the book, as our Solomon figure urges us to seek the way of God's wisdom, and then retells the story of the Torah as wisdom literature that places two paths in front of you. Chapters 7 through 9 return our focus to the story of Solomon from 1 Kings chapter 3. It begins with Solomon's request for God's wisdom, as the young, ignorant king gives up his dreams of wealth and power in order to seek God. And he later realizes that God's wisdom is the gateway to the truly good life. In the center of this whole section is a poem where God's wisdom is personified and praised as Lady Wisdom, who is like God's second self. Wisdom is a mirror and an image of God's goodness. And when humans live by this wisdom, they become true images of God who reflect God's character into the world. The ideas here are rooted in Genesis chapter 1, Psalm 8, and Proverbs 8 about the ideal, wise humans that God has made us all to become. The portrait that ends this section is of an old, wise Solomon who chose God's wisdom and is now offered as a model for later readers who can discover their own humanity by seeking wisdom as well. The book's final movement retells the storyline of the Torah as a kind of wisdom literature, picking up the earlier challenge to world rulers from chapters 1 through 6. He first considers 7 wise characters: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Lot, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses with the Israelites. And each one of these is contrasted with their unrighteous or foolish opposite, who suffers a sad fate in a mess of their own making. The 7th and last pair opens up the final section of the book, all about the conflict of Moses and the Israelites versus Pharaoh and the Egyptians. This picks up a theme from the book's opening section about the nations persecuting God's righteous one, God's son, which is what the Israelites were called during their suffering under Pharaoh. The author paints 7 contrasting portraits showing how the disasters brought upon Egypt match the acts of deliverance that God performed for the Israelites. When thirsty Egyptians couldn't drink water from the bloody Nile, the thirsty Israelites got water from the rocks in the wilderness. The Egyptians worshipped frogs and got pummeled by a storm of frogs, while the Israelites who worshipped the Creator got a rainstorm of quail to eat. The Israelites were delivered from poisonous snakes, while Egypt got destroyed by locusts and flies, and so on. The climactic 7th contrast shows the Egyptians being destroyed by the waters of the sea, while the Israelites walk on dry land through those same waters. The point is this: the Exodus story is the ultimate challenge to the rulers of our world. When leaders don't submit themselves to God's authority and they allow injustice to the poor, expect the Exodus pattern to kick into gear. God will bring down such kingdoms while saving his people, so you should pick your team wisely. Within the section, the author offers 2 poetic reflections on the theme of God and the nations. The first poem is about God's mercy, how he patiently tolerated the evil of the Egyptians and even the Canaanites, giving them centuries to change their ways. The second poem is an expose on the destructive nature of idolatry, how the worship of human creations, including our own kingdoms, dishonors the Creator, and it leads to moral corruption as we elevate our desires to divine status. Here the author creates a bridge back into his own day, as the Egyptians of the Exodus now stand for the Greeks and non-Israelites of his day, who were filling the world with gods and idols that represent their values and power structures, leading to violent empires of oppression. Like Egypt, these empires will end one day, and God's people will be vindicated if they remain faithful. The Wisdom of Solomon creatively combines all the main themes of the Torah and biblical wisdom books to address a cultural crisis in the author's generation. All humans and their rulers are like Adam and Eve and Solomon, born into this world with a choice. Will I redefine good and evil by my own wisdom and the wisdom of my culture? That way leads to idolatry and injustice. Or will I submit myself to the wisdom of the one true Creator God? That way leads to the tree of life and to wise humans who faithfully image God into the world, resulting in a world of justice, beauty, and true life. What world will you choose? That is what the Wisdom of Solomon is all about.